So, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Torquay Council's Cabinet meeting. First of all, I'll just do a little bit of housekeeping. So if your phone isn't already on silent or off, I would encourage you to do that, although mine still talks to me. And we are not expecting any fire alarms today. I understand that it is a spoken message. And if there is a fire alarm, then the assembly point is the seaward side of the tennis courts. As far as Lisa, do we have any apologies at the moment?
Chair, I have no apologies.
And sorry, colleagues, I need to mention the meeting is being recorded, so do bear that in mind. We then move on to minutes from the last meeting. I'm happy to propose these as minutes of the last meeting. Do I have a seconder?
Happy to second.
All those in favour, please show.
Unanimous, Chair.
Thank you. And then we move on to declarations of interest. Does anybody have any pecuniary or non-pecuniary declarations of interest, whether they are members or officers? Councillor Cowell.
Just to declare a non-pecuniary interest as a member of the Torquay Neighbourhood Forum.
And I am in the same position, so I declare the same interest. And Councillor Morey, I understand you have a declaration.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Declaring a non-pecuniary interest in item 7, as I'm a board member of the Admiral Swimming Centre, but it is a non-pecuniary interest.
Thank you. Lisa, do we have any urgent items?
We have none, Chair.
Thank you. And then we move on to communications. There's just one item under communications. Councillor Cowell, I understand you have a plea to all councillors.
Thank you, Chair. And it's in relation to the publication of the Children's Society report on the future of local welfare and discretionary support for families facing crisis. And it's a request to encourage all members to sign up to the open letter, and we'll distribute the link to be able to sign up to that. And the key elements of the report produced by the Children's Society on the future of local welfare, including local welfare assistance, the Household Support Fund and other schemes. The report sets out a number of recommendations regarding funding to support those in financial crisis. The Children's Society have also requested local authorities to sign an open letter to the Chancellor of the Exchequer, supporting the following recommendations to invest in and strengthen the Household Support Fund by a 3-year commitment of funding from the UK Government starting in 2024 to local authorities in England and devolved administrations of at least £1 billion per year from a permanent household support fund. All eligible English local authorities are required to provide a household support fund branded scheme open locally to anyone in financial crisis and provide basic monitoring information as a minimum. An additional 5% funding provided to each local authority to administer their schemes and ensure there is effective local coordination to bring together partners and preventative services and provide capacity to monitor outcomes and impact. And finally, families being protected from financial insecurity through an adequately funded social security system and good wages that always allow them to afford the essentials. And there's never been more critical time than the cost of living crisis in an area like Torquay, where we are all too well aware of this severe impact on many families in Torquay. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Cowell, and colleagues, I'll ensure that that link is shared with all after this meeting to encourage people to support that. And it's perhaps particularly fitting that we've got Catherine Fritz with us today. So thank you, Catherine, for joining us from the Citizens Advice Bureau to give us an overview of what challenges the CAB are facing. So hopefully you've got a short presentation, and then hopefully you might be in a position to take a couple of questions from Cabinet members. Thank you, Catherine.
Now it's on. Okay, thank you. First off, many of you know me wearing other hats, but I've been volunteering with Citizens Advice in research and campaigns capacity now for several years. And so I was very honored that when Steve had asked the office to send some information here, that they asked me to come speak. I am, because I very much respect all that they do. So I'm not an advisor, although there is a case study that I'm going to read out to you because I think it will get across a lot of the ideas. But Citizens Advice is about a lot more than just help with debt and benefits, and right now these days everybody's energy bills. It's about so many other things, and we do help people with a variety of things. And I suppose one thing to bear in mind is, now let's see, there we go, that one of the advantages we have in doing this is that people's needs and lives are very complex. And with the cost of living crisis, if anything, they're becoming much more multifaceted. There are various factors that are coming together to put people under strain that's unmanageable. And as a result, what's really needed is to have the kind of support where they have advisors working with the same person to start with the problem they come with, and in supporting them there to help identify other areas where they could use some support, where they need support, and to provide that as we go along. Now, the couple of quotes that are on this particular slide were taken off some of the thank you cards that just happened to be on the wall in the office one of the days that I was in there. But they capture some of what's happening here. It's personal, ongoing support with people that matters. If you we've learned with the helpline that sending people to one place where they can deal with all their problems is beneficial. But the helpline, of course, is signposting and referring, whereas Citizens Advice, for the most part, is actually staying with people through every aspect of it. And so that's one of the real advantages to what's happening there. Now, before I go into things about the data on what all has been done and what we expect to happen, I do want to read to you this case study. It'll only take a few minutes, but it's providing support for one client over 4 months, and there may be more to come. And it involves helping with benefits, with local support, with charitable support, budgeting, utilities, energy-saving advice. And there's a good mixture, and this is an important aspect, of both acting on behalf of the client, because the client often said, no, I can't do this. I can't call them. Either I don't have the technical skills or I'm not in a mental state to do it. Or where the client does say, yeah, I could manage doing this online thing. Helping them, pointing them where they need to go and having them act on their own so that they can, the next times they face problems, be better equipped to act on their own, to deal with it. So I'm just going to read through this rather quickly. The case study shows an example of the level of work involved in dealing with a client's query and also how the core and the specialist services can work together. The client was given a full benefit check for herself and her son. They were assisted to claim the appropriate benefits. The client also has debts and has a child aged under 10. All the case notes are not included here. There are 35 entries, so there's quite a bit of work, but this gives you an idea of some of the work involved. Obviously, some of the content has been removed and other things sort of just glossed over to make sure that the client is not identifiable. But in July, the client had been working and had cancer before, but was given the all clear last year. She's now been told that her cancer is returned. Although not DS 1500, that is, has a certificate that says she won't live for 12 months, she was told that she has 1 to 2 years and that it is not curable. She's due to start chemo tomorrow for an indefinite period, and she's in such pain and discomfort already that she cannot sleep in her bed because her mattress is so old, thin, and has springs protruding. Instead, she's sleeping on the sofa. The client already had Household Support Fund grant of £100, but has not applied to the Welfare Support Fund, which I advised her to do. She can manage online forms. I completed a Northcott application, including completing an income expenditure form, and wrote a covering letter for the client to sign and send on. The client's son claims carer's allowance, and I informed her that he is also eligible for universal credit of £132 per month. They were not aware that he could claim this benefit, so that's going to help them. The client has a pound coin meter for her electricity and is spending £35 per week on this. She has a prepayment gas meter and has a debt of £500 approximately on it, which eats any credit she puts on. She puts on £30 to £60 per week. She said she put on £20 the other day and had £5 worth of gas because she had been in emergency credit. The client would like energy advice, and I said she may qualify for an emergency fuel voucher as well. July and August, emergency fuel vouchers were issued to the client and other advice given, including debt advice. The client used the income expenditure information to help apply for welfare support grant. She also applied for a council tax energy rebate. In August, the Northcott Fund awarded the client £200 cash. She used this to go to Refresh to get a mattress. September, called the client. The client said she finally got through to her energy company by phone this morning, but was on hold for 45 minutes before she got through. She said they'd given her a £25 credit voucher code for her gas meter, which she will need to pay back. She said her partner tried to redeem this today, and it seems there's a digit missing. Advised the client that the energy company are the only people who can help her with the credit they've provided today, and that if a digit is missing, they'll need to provide her with the correct voucher code digits. She said she will call again the energy company to resolve this. Suggested to the client it might be quicker to contact them by Facebook, Twitter, or WhatsApp if she has any of these accounts. She says she has WhatsApp and Facebook and is contacting them that way as they suggested on their webpage. Talked the client through the information on this page while we were on the phone. The client clicked to WhatsApp, but received a response saying it could be 2 days before they get back to her. She decided she'll phone again and hang on until they answer to resolve the missing digit of the £25 gas credit they've given her today. Discussed form of authority process with the client and said I can send this to her next week if she wants me to contact the energy company on her behalf if she has outstanding queries with them. Asked the client if she spoke to the energy company regarding reducing her payments for the arrears, and the client said she had today, and that they've now reduced her payments to £2 per week for her arrears, so this part of the query is resolved. The client asked about the warm home discount, as it's not her fault that she has a coin meter for her electric and therefore doesn't fit the criteria at this stage. The client also asked about £400 energy government payment. Advised client I will check this as the client does not have a domestic electricity account in her own name. Advised the client we'll check this and be back in contact with her this month. Actioned. Then in October, the client said she had a cold. It turned to sepsis and she ended up in hospital, but she's okay now. She's not putting on her gas heating to ensure that she stays out of emergency credit. She said she's lost a lot of weight and is struggling to keep warm. She said she's going to bed each evening at 6:30 to keep warm. She said since she called the energy company to inform them of her health condition and she registered for the Priority Services Register, they agreed to reduce her debt repayments to £2 per week. She said, in fact, they've not been taking anything. She's not received any notification to say the debt has been written off. I reminded her the possibility of applying to have the debt written off, but the need for debt advice is an initial step in this process. Regarding her electric coin meter, client said she spoke to her landlord, who said that he has a business account, so there is no entitlement to the Energy Bills Support Scheme. I advised that the information from our expert advice stated that the Energy Bills Support Scheme Alternative Fund provides the £400 of support for households across the UK that would otherwise miss out on the Energy Bills Support Scheme, as they do not have a domestic electricity contract. I said we would let her know if there was any update from Torquay Council about this. Client to contact us again via email or phone if she needs further assistance. And it goes on. And that may seem like, oh, I chose one that was particularly complex, but actually that's not much more complex than average. Some are simple, some are far more complex than that. Now, I'm going to just briefly show a little bit of data, partly because I'm a data junkie. But I want to point out that the data I'm showing aren't necessarily indicative of what's happening across Torquay, because it's a self-selected sample of people who have come to Citizens Advice, and our capacity to serve the people is somewhat limited by our staffing levels and facilities. This is a graph that's got a whole bunch of information, so just very briefly, this is showing the issues that we're addressing, and each bar represents the January data for 1 year, starting with January 2019, January 2020, January 2021, January 2022, and January 2023. I chose January because I could get the most recent data from last month and then just pick the same month for the other years. Obviously, the pattern is somewhat different in the summer than in the winter. But if you look at the bottom of the graph, that's where we're seeing utilities and communications. That's about 30% of the issues we're dealing with now have to do. And those, I've looked at what that's composed of, and it's almost all dealing with fuel bills. It's dealing with electricity, gas, oil, other fuel bills, having to do with trying to get matters resolved or dealing with billing errors and things like that. Then we've got about another 25% that's dealing with benefits and tax credits, and you can see across the years that that's a fairly consistent chunk of the issues we deal with. It's about 25%. Debt, you'll note, has been on the rise of late, and it is something that Citizens Advice nationally as well as locally is forecasting is going to be rising further over the next couple of years. Right now, people have been dealing with the cost of living crisis in part by going into debt. And the next item is housing. And I have to point out that the debt issue is one that is very much aggravated by the situation with the local housing allowance having been frozen for so long while rents have been going up outstandingly. And both Citizens Advice data, and I was talking to West Country Savings and Loan, the only credit union that serves our area, and they're having the same problem in that about half of the people coming to them that for any kind of debt advice or debt dealings with are actually in what they call a negative budget. That is, their necessary outgoings exceed their maximum incoming money. And so month on month, they are going further and further into debt. And that's not a sustainable situation. It means that debt is going to become more and more of an issue. And it also means that a number of people are going to sadly end up turning to things like loan sharks. And that leads to a lot more criminal activity and the problems there. And that's this interaction. I happened to glance through some of the things coming up on the budget discussion that's going to be happening when I was looking at the papers for this because I'm a nosy person, and noticed that the discretionary housing payments coming from the government year on year are being cut and cut and cut at the same time that the need for them is increasing and increasing and increasing. So I don't envy you trying to figure out how best for the local authority to deal with this. Anyway, the other issues you can see did play a larger role in the past, but right now they're playing a much smaller role in great part because the number of things dealing with the utilities, the benefits, and the debt and the housing have been on the increase. Looking at the debt advice, because I thought this might be an interesting one to just have a glance at, the column on the left is January 2019, and these are the top items, the ones that had the most, dealing with more issues with that kind of debt. And January 2023, last month, by far fuel debts. We had more issues dealing with fuel debts than anything else, followed by council tax arrears. Council tax arrears previously had been number one, but it got knocked out of number one by the fuel debts. Magistrates' courts, fines and arrears, that has for some reason really popped up big. I haven't dug into it to figure out exactly why. Water supply and sewage debts, that's still sitting in there on a very high level. And then you can see many of these other things have picked up debt relief orders. There's more people applying for debt relief orders now because they've gotten to the point where they know that they cannot get out from under their debts any other way. So you can get a feel for the fact that things have changed considerably. Some of the things that were more important have dropped down a bit, but not necessarily because they're less of an issue, because other issues have taken priority, I think. Citizens Advice provides a lot of value for money. For every pound that's invested in Citizens Advice, there's a savings of £3.29 to government and public services, and an increase of £22.26 in wider economic and social benefits, and £13.57 in terms of what the clients are actually getting. So that's not bad. Locally, local government, through reducing homelessness, saves about £75,000, almost £75,000, as well as their administrative cost savings, because Citizens Advice does a lot of handling things and working with the council staff so that the council staff doesn't get as overwhelmed as they would otherwise be with people who are needing some of the help here. And I've been very impressed with how well the council staff and Citizens Advice work together on this. It's what we need to see. And I'm very pleased that across Torquay we see a lot of people working together to make things happen appropriately. And there's a lot in terms of the additional income and well-being for people. In fact, just recently, and I've sent to a couple of people, there was an Office for National Statistics report on the impact on well-being of the financial pressures that people are under. And it's a very well-researched piece, as the Office for National Statistics often does. And if anybody is interested in it, and I haven't sent it to them, ask me and I'll send it to you. But in terms of well-being type impact, 8 in 10 of the clients said that their problem was solved following the Citizens' Advice, which I think is pretty good. 9 in 10 said that they were helped find a way forward, a way out of it. And 6 in 10 people said that they were less stressed, depressed, or anxious. And I think that, that's pretty impressive when there's a lot of other things to make people stressed, depressed, and anxious, other than things that Citizens' Advice could help them with. So in terms of the future, debt is going to be a big one. Utilities will probably continue for some time. Benefits will always be big, and housing, we think, is going to be an increasing pressure all around. So thank you very much. And if I can answer your questions, I'll do so. And if you have questions I can't answer, I'll take them back to the office.
Thank you, Catherine. That was extremely enlightening, and we really appreciate you taking some time out and sharing that overview of the world that you face through the Citizens Advice Bureau. I just wanted to start off the questions by, I'm left with the impression that people are coming forward with, rather than single problems, but multiple challenges. How is that manifesting itself, please?
In the past, I would say on average, maybe we had 2 problems per client. These days, I was looking at the data recently, and it's, on average, that's 4 problems per client. But bear in mind that if you take off the single issue clients, the people that are coming in with one clear issue, they get it resolved and they're gone away. Then if you're just averaging the others, it's probably more like 7 or 8 issues per client. And the issues are often somewhat intertwined. You've got housing issues and debt issues and health issues related to that because the housing stock being poor, and the energy bills being high because the housing isn't well insulated, and the fact that people are having to rely on private rentals. The negative budgeting, when you look at that, the people in private rental accommodation are the ones who are suffering most with that. Of the people who have come to Citizens Advice nationally for debt advice, the ones that are in private rentals, over half of them are in negative budgeting. And that says how much this lack of, the increasing rents and the lack of money increasing to go along with it is hitting people. The people in social accommodation are much better off because those rents are not rising as rapidly. Instead of going up by 35% over the last couple of years, they've only gone up by 20 or 25%, while the local housing allowances stayed fixed.
Okay. Thank you very much for that, Catherine. Any other questions from colleagues or from around the table, Cabinet colleagues at all?
Nobody's indicated, Chair.
Okay, right. So thank you, Catherine, so much for your time today, and also thank you for highlighting to us about the report. So thank you very much. So
I'd like to thank you for inviting us, and also I'd like to invite every councillor, where you have any of your people who need some help, don't hesitate to suggest they contact Citizens Advice. As a matter of fact, just today they instituted a new phone system that makes them better able to handle and return calls. So do send people to Citizens Advice.
Right.
They do the best job imaginable.
thank you.
Thanks, Catherine.
Right, so colleagues, we now move on to the main agenda of our meeting this evening. So the first item is the emerging budget for 23-24. This was originally proposed some weeks ago. It's been out for consultation. We've also had feedback from Overview and Scrutiny Committee that met in this building a couple of weeks ago, and we're in a position to be able to share our response to this afternoon. So, Councillor Cowell, you're going to propose and I'll be seconding. So, Councillor Cowell, if you'd like to put forward our recommendations, please.
Thank you, Chair. And can I start by thanking everybody who participated in the consultation, particularly a thanks to Overview and Scrutiny for their time and observations that were submitted to Cabinet. And it's encouraging that most of the original recommendations that were submitted for consultation have been adopted and, recognised and supported as a result of that consultation. There were some recommendations which the Cabinet have listened to, as we have done in previous years. So of the total budget of 131 million this year, it does represent a balanced budget, which we have to propose in law, and that has been achieved. But there are some specific areas that we had made recommendations. One in particular was around the air show. We've withdrawn that proposed saving, and in actual fact have increased the budget to support this year's air show because we recognise its value and importance as part of the leading event at the start of our summer season. You'll also be aware, perhaps, those of you taking interest in sport and leisure centres in particular, that there's been recently a lot of commentary from national bodies about the plight facing swimming pools in particular. And we'd already recognised that here in Torquay because we work closely with the two community pools, the Admiral Pool in Brixham and Swim Torquay at Playmore. They've been talking to us about their pressures because of the energy costs, and you can imagine the cost it takes to heat pools. And therefore we've actually added in an additional £12,000 a year each to those facilities because of the importance, A, to the community, but also in recognition of health and well-being. That's a further investment and in our commitment to sport and leisure in Torquay because we actually increased the general sports fund, Torquay on the Move fund, from £50,000 to £75,000. So it shows that ongoing commitment to sport. We're also very much aware of the challenges around our town centres. We know we have £1.1 million investment in safer streets in Torquay, working with the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner and the police, and improving efforts to address some of those issues in the town centre. That's also wrapped up in some of our capital programme around the town deal that we continue to support. So in recognition of the need to develop strategies for our town centres, such as events or priorities within Paignton, Torquay and Brixham, we're proposing the addition of £100,000 a year to be able to provide that level of support, which we will work up with the key stakeholders in those each of those three towns, such as the Chamber of Commerce and so on. One of the administrations and the partnership administration's key priorities has been around housing. And we recently met with Yes Brixham, who have already delivered some innovative housing schemes as part of the asset-based community development model. And there are other schemes in Torquay that we've recognised will need some support to be able to get their projects over the line. Therefore, we're recommending the creation of a £3 million loan facility that these self-build organisations or community-led housing schemes can bid into. And each of those will be assessed on a business case as each comes forward. One of the other early recommendations was to identify some changing in the funding around the TDA. That £200,000 we recognise needs to continue to be invested and to support economic regeneration. I've just talked about town centres, but there's the wider need to increase employment skills and to try and encourage the inward investment that we know that we can achieve by investing in economic regeneration. So that £200,000 remains in the budget. The other key area that we've always been trying to support is that general pride in place. We've already invested, and we've seen recent reports of the £2 million investment in Swissco in terms of equipment, and that helps in terms of keeping our streets clean. And we've recently brought the machines to wash and power wash our streets. And as part of that 100k investment in the Premier Resort, we've just recently had the first of this season's meetings to start setting the priorities and identify the key projects to ensure that there's a clean and vibrant welcome for our visitors and indeed our residents alike during the coming summer months. And finally, the one area at budget times that people normally tend to lose sight of is the capital budget. The recommendation is that there be a £90 million allocation spending from that capital programme in the coming financial year. We recognise the extreme pressures on the capital programme for a whole variety of reasons, not least the increase in building material costs, the supply chain challenges, the increase in interest rates following the chaos of a short-term Prime Minister recently. So we are absolutely focused on working to deliver that capital programme. It's so important around the town deal, Future High Streets Fund, levelling up opportunities, investment in all three towns, not just the town centres, but in employment opportunities around the bay. We're seeing the work at Edgenswell already started. That's as a result of the enabling works, and we're seeing the steelworks going up for the Wicks development. All part of the commitment to capital investment in Torquay, which we will continue to do so in the coming years. So with that, I would propose the budget as laid out before you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Cowell, and apologies, I should have said that I will allow group leaders to make a short statement before we take the vote, and we'll be having no debate within Cabinet, just propose that seconders and any group leaders who may wish to make a short statement, because clearly the main debate will be at full council on the 7th. So thank you, Councillor Cowell, for laying out the key changes that we've got in the budget before us this evening. I think it's just important that we are alive to a couple of issues. We have had the cost of living crisis has been very significant for families. We heard that earlier on from Catherine Fritz. And excuse me. When we look at what the council bill has been for utilities, for our streetlights and powering of other services, we're looking at 12 months ago about £800,000 a year. During this year, it's increased to £1.5 million, and now we're looking at, roughly speaking, £3 million is the projection for this forthcoming year. So that demonstrates that some of those significant pressures that we are facing as a local authority with our finances and trying to manage that approach. The capital programme is also another area that we have had significant pressures, and we've had to build in-year gap funding because of what we've seen, both with the escalating costs within the building industry, which has been exacerbated by the pandemic that we've come out of, and equally the war in Ukraine. And then to add insult to injury, the Liz Truss premiership with the kamikaze mini budget, where we saw interest rates bouncing up significantly higher than we would have reasonably anticipated only a few months before. So that continues to play pressures on our budget that we had set previously with our capital programme, but we do have high aspirations to turn the tide on poverty in Torquay and continue to drive that agenda, which is what we coalesced together a little under 4 years ago between independent and Liberal Democrat members to drive our partnership over this period of time. So I'll go to group leaders now in case there's any statements or comments that they may wish to make on the budget. So Councillor Thomas, do you have anything that you may wish to say before we vote on this? So in your time, Dave.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So clearly the changes were released about 2 o'clock this afternoon. I've had a chance to read them but not thoroughly digest them. So I'll give a little bit of feedback early on. We'll be speaking, of course, with the whole group, and we'll be able to give you a fuller view next week at Council. So, however, my own view is, at the moment, what appears, the consultation looks to have been very poor. Only 15 people under the age of 45 responded. Consultation in total was less than 70 responses, but I would suggest that this is perhaps the lowest number of responses that we have ever had within the council. But to be honest, then again, if you look at the effort that we put into the consultation with a single Facebook Live 1 hour session, it's not really surprising that we had such a low level of response. I'd just like to pick out 2 items from the list of the feedback, and that is advertising in community magazines. 71.6% were against that. There's no change on that one being brought forward from the budget. And the inclusion officer, just short of 60%, were also against that. Again, we see no change going forward on that one. You have mentioned the capital. I think capital is really, really important. We can see in 6.11 from our 151 officer the risks to the capital plan, because any risk to the capital plan has a clear impact on the revenue budget. The administration are confident that many of the capital schemes will be delivered within the next 12 months. We can see that from the press releases that have been put out. However, if we just take one capital scheme, Crossways, we know that the costs have increased significantly. We know that there is no end user. We know that there's not enough money in the scheme to cover the build out as per the published plans. However, we see nothing in the revenue budget to deal with that black hole, and one has to wonder why. Although, just picking up, I think, on a key phrase that was used a little earlier this evening, which is built in, we need to build in-year gap funding. My question is this code for X million from our revenue account? I just want to stay with this 6.11 report from our 151 officer. He warns, and I quote, "Alternatively, the council can approve additional funding for a project, but at ongoing revenue cost for the principal and interest costs." Clearly, this could be done in the case of Crossways. I don't know. I have no idea how much it could be. Could it be £800,000 per annum? Would that be an unfair estimate based on other situations that we have already seen come through this council? So my question would be, how can we have a balanced revenue budget when we have not only the ambition, but the commitment to deliver this, plus many other schemes across the next 12 months? But if the financial side of most of the capital plans simply don't add up, how are they not there within the revenue budget? And I guess I'm probably at my 30 seconds, so I'll stop there. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. And so clearly we will have that fuller debate at full council. So colleagues, it has been proposed and seconded. All those in favour, please show.
Unanimous, Chair.
Thank you, colleagues. So we'll now move on to the redesignation of the Torquay Neighbourhood Forum. who would be Councillor Morey. Sorry, we both need to, Councillor Cowell and I need to declare an interest. I assume that's why you're signalling.
Just to confirm that declaration.
Yeah. Thank you.
Chair.
And Councillor Morey, would you like to propose? And it's a non-pecuniary interest that we have, of course.
More than happy, Chair. In my opinion, this is a straightforward and, in a way, a sort of a technical report that should be supported by all members, not only those of in the cabinet. Excuse me. Torquay has placed great emphasis on neighbourhood planning over the last 4 years and has bay-wide neighbourhood plan coverage. Neighbourhood plans, along with the Torquay local plan, form the legal starting point for determining planning applications. Neighbourhood plans are prepared, Neighbourhood plans are prepared by neighbourhood forums, and a great deal of voluntary work goes into their preparation. The Torquay neighbourhood plan was made by Torquay Council in June 2019, following a referendum in May of that year, and remains in force regardless of the forum status. The proposals in this report will give the residents of Torquay a greater say in the planning process in their area by redesignating the neighbourhood forum body, and this redesignation will last for 5 years. Both Torquay and Payton neighbourhood forums, designated on the December 2017, ceased to formally exist in December 2022. Many volunteers have worked tirelessly on the preparation of neighbourhood plans across Torquay, which were adopted in 2019 and now form part of that development plan for Torquay. The forum status does not affect the validity of the neighbourhood plans. No forum application has been received, however, from the Payton area. The proposed forum group have indicated they wish to refresh the existing neighbourhood plan. For the purposes of any refresh of the neighbourhood plan envisaged, it is noted that the neighbourhood planning framework does not have the power to set a strategic housing level for the area outside the local plan's strategic framework. This situation will endure until the local plan is updated. Chairman, I therefore move the revised recommendation, which was published earlier this year, this afternoon, if you do have any questions, we've got both David Edmondson and Adam Luscombe here to help out.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Moore. Councillor Long, I understand you may wish to second.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm happy to second. I know there's a lot of work gone into preparing for this, but happy to second. Thank you.
So, David Edmondson and Adam Luscombe, and do you wish to clarify anything, or are you happy for us to continue?
He's happy.
Yeah. So, move on to debate. And any debate from around the table? I suspect this is fairly straightforward, I hope. So, Councillor Jackie Stockman.
Thank you, Chair. All I wanted to say as a former chair of the Brixton Peninsula Neighbourhood Forum is that I commend the Torquay Forum for wanting to be designated again, because it's such a hard job to do, and to keep people together, to do it over a series of years, and to do such a good job that they did previously, and now to do the refresh of it, with so many unknowns, if you like, with regards to government legislation which may or may not change, which could or could not assist us. But we're very much in flux at the moment. But as the coalition of the Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives actually brought in the Localism Act, it's given the right of citizens to actually do these plans, and I'm sure that everyone in the room supports them. So thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cowell.
Thank you, Chair. And just to place on record, obviously, myself and Councillor Darling have declared our interest in the Torquay Neighbourhood Forum, and I actually sit as its vice chair and have done for a few years. And I echo Councillor Stockman's comments about the commitment of a group of volunteers who spend hour upon hour upon hour developing these neighbourhood plans. The current neighbourhood plan, as Councillor Morey alluded to, was made in 2019. It's currently being refreshed and updated, and that is proving to be quite challenging because of the somewhat vacuum that we're working in on a national basis, of the changes that are coming down the line that may in actual fact enhance the status of neighbourhood plans. At the moment they lose some of their weight after 2 years, and the recommendations that we're beginning to see noises from Westminster is that that would actually be 5 years, which would be a significant help in terms of being able to protect Torquay from predatory development in areas that we don't want. And just to also bring colleagues' attention and members of the public's attention to the fact that it's not just developing those neighbourhood plans, but it actually monitors the plans, it monitors the planning applications, and Torquay has been a frequent contributor to planning applications that affect the Torquay area, both in support and constructive objection where appropriate. And that process it engages all of the community partnerships. It's just not just a small group of people at random from a small part of Torquay. The forum is representing all corners of the town. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Cowell. Councillor Nick Bye.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I just wanted to add my support to this recommendation as someone who occasionally turns up at the planning committee as a sort of visiting guest artist when others aren't available, or if there's something of great contention within the Wellswood ward. And I have to say the way the Torquay Neighbourhood Forum functions and has functioned most recently is exemplary, absolutely, as Councillor Cowell has just praised, the involvement with the community partnerships. And I think it is the way in for the community through the neighbourhood forum, and absolutely the point that the current chairman comes along to support proposals, important proposals, as well as when he's unhappy or the forum is unhappy and they oppose. So it was a very dry report, if I may say so. That's not a criticism. I know you all work terribly hard in these areas, but it's a very dry sort of processy report. But I just wanted to say I think that it does work well and it deserves your support. So thank you so much for making it a little bit less dry.
Thank you, Councillor Bye. So any other hands, please, Lisa, from members from around the room?
Nobody's indicated,
Okay,
Chair.
thank you. So it's been moved and seconded. All those in favour, please show.
It's unanimous.
Thank you. So, thank you for that, colleagues. So, moving on now, we move on to the Housing Strategy Report. Councillor Long, I understand that you're presenting this item, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, you understand correctly. And sadly, I couldn't get to the overview and scrutiny meeting on this item because I had the joys of COVID and decided not to share. The current housing strategy runs until April 2025, but was adopted prior to the pandemic and before the housing and climate change crisis were declared. And Torquay is indeed suffering a housing crisis with, I understand, 1,600 households on the housing waiting list. And I think Catherine Fritz's presentation earlier from the CAB just highlighted it even further and hit her nail on the head as regards the local housing allowance in particular was concerned. Both the Strategic Housing Board and the Housing Delivery Group advised that updating the strategy in light of the profound changes that both the pandemic and the declarations have made. The strategy sets out what the Council and its partners will do to improve housing for current and future residents. The strategy has 3 priorities: to improve housing supply, improve housing quality, and thirdly, to improve housing support. There are also 3 cross-cutting principles: putting customers first, tackling climate change, and working in partnership. During the current year, there has been some important work done in some key crucial foundation areas. There's been work to increase the capacity in planning and housing to enhance the development of affordable housing. There's also work being done to tackle disrepair and poor housing conditions, including the review and reduction of empty homes, and investing in temporary accommodation and client support as well, with additional resource put into housing options. The strategy has taken on a number of comments and suggestions from the consultation that it's fresh back from. Section 5.2 of the report outlines the changes in detail. The housing strategy also sets out the Council's ambitions in the area of housing, but it's the local plan that's going to determine the exact number of homes. 186 people took part in the consultation, including residents who are in temporary accommodation and in social housing, which I was very pleased to see. And the consultation showed that there was support for the principles and priorities in the strategy. And I'd like to recommend the proposal in item 3, please, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Long. Councillor Cowell, I understand you're seconding.
Thank you, Chair. And like most people around this table, it's what drives my agenda is all around housing, because without decent housing, you can't have a decent opportunity for education or health or employment. And as Councillor Long indicated, Torquay has a housing crisis. We have an appallingly low number of social homes to rent. We have a disproportionately high number of private homes to rent. And of course, we've seen the rocketing prices of the private rented sector, as again, Catherine Fritz alluded to, which puts those additional pressures on our wider welfare of our residents in Torquay. And it's not just about bricks and mortar, it is about those housing standards and ensuring that we work with the registered providers and the existing social landlords as well as the private sector to ensure that people have a decent home. And we've seen recent cases nationally and indeed reports locally of the issues of mould and damp. And that is as a result of years and years and years of underinvestment and prioritisation into our existing housing stock, and the need to actually make sure that they're properly insulated so that that actually drives down energy costs and protects household budgets. All of these kind of things need to be driven forward. And I'm absolutely confident that, particularly with the chair of the Strategic Housing Board, Alistair Allender, who was absolutely explicit in his support for this strategy, that we have got somebody who is really embedded and committed to supporting our ambition to improve housing in Torquay. It's not going to be a light switch moment. It's not going to happen overnight, but it's going to be a sustained programme of complete focus from the council and partners to deliver better housing in Torquay. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, colleagues, for proposing a second. I just want to say a few comments myself before we move on to any further debate. And I think it was often said by David Cameron and Osborne that the Labour government had crashed the economy. Well, whether that's true or not, or whether it is whether it is economics, that's up to the historians to decide. But when you look at the housing situation in Torquay, I would say that particularly the previous 2 terms of the Conservative-led administration had crushed the housing approach in Torquay, and then they dismantled the car and hidden certain elements of what makes up the vehicle all over a field. So the reality is that over the last few years we have been pulling the vehicle that delivers affordable housing back together again in Torquay. This demonstrates that the engine is beginning to hum and we're moving ahead with the delivery of affordable housing. And I think it shows a strength of maturity of setting up that strategic housing board and getting a critical friend to come and join us with the local authority, with Alistair Allender, who I value greatly, with his critical friend stance to drive the affordable housing agenda. We are, we have been, at a standing start on this, but we now do, through the investment through previous years, been able to build in those officer posts that are required to drive the levels of affordable housing. This strategy is something to be really welcomed because we can crack on with this and drive what we know is desperately needed, but also we do need central government to be playing ball with us as far as driving the monies for the desperately needed affordable housing. A personal bugbear of mine is that Homes England, they are measured by the numbers of affordable housing that they actually deliver, rather than actually whether the affordable housing is delivered in those communities most in need of affordable housing, and those communities such as Torquay, where we have less than half the national average of affordable housing social rented in our communities, which, as we heard from the presentation for the CAB earlier on, can be a major determinant on whether families are just about managing or falling and more into debt. So I think this is a really exciting report. I'm keen that we crack on with it. Do we have any other hands from around the table, please, Lisa, wishing to speak?
Councillor Stockman.
Do come in, Jackie.
Thank you, Chair. I'm particularly interested in the link between health and well-being and the provision of good standard homes and homes that are not cheap to run, because none of them are, but available to be run by people that aren't as fortunate as others. I'm particularly pleased to see this strategy, which I believe is much stronger than previous strategies. Just to say that when I was elected in 2011, there was no housing strategy at all. So it's good to see this. I too would like to see the government do something for councils, in that I think I'm right in saying that under the NPPF, the National Planning Policy Framework, currently it's a minimum of 10% required for affordable homes, with councils able to set their own amount over and above 10%, and we currently set them at 30%. And those of us that are in the room that have watched over the years, it's not very often that we actually achieve 30% because the developers come back and say it's not viable. So it would be good if the level of the minimum level required on any large development was upped at central level. So maybe our colleagues over there could actually pass it along the line that we'd like to see that increase. I remember, I think, only recently I worked it out that at the level that we're at, we have been building, and the level required, it would take us something like 32 years to get anywhere near the current waiting list, and that would be building out at the higher end of the numbers that we've been given under the standard methodology, and so it is difficult. It is a crisis. And I refer to what Catherine Fritz says, it's a real detriment to the people that live in the Bay not to provide the affordable homes. And I hope with the measures that we put in place, plus the budget measures of, the millions that have been the 3 million option of a loan to help communities build their own affordable homes, will in some measure reduce the issues that we face in Torquay. Thank you.
Thank you. And I've as normal, I've got overexcited and failed to ask Tara Harris or David Edmondson whether you'd wish to comment at this stage or add anything to what colleagues who proposed and seconded may have said so far.
You've given a great deal of detail. The only other thing, we did some work recently looking at the numbers of dwellings permitted. So over the last year, sort of 730 dwellings permitted, which should bring forward 170 affordable housing units, which is really positive. But that's the permissions issued, and as we know, it's about delivery, and we're just not seeing those homes delivered. So that was a positive bit of news looking at the figures. But over the last few years, it clearly hasn't been high enough. That was all I was going to mention. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. It's a little like the Holcombe site with Vistry Homes. It's pleasing that I can write to them and they do up the boarding along there. It's a pity that if I write to them and say, can you please build the houses, that won't necessarily happen. Anyway, but other hands within the room or from around the table, please, Lisa.
Councillor Carter from the table.
Thank you. Councillor Carter, do come in.
Yeah, this is a really thorough report, and it really shows how housing cuts across the whole of the council. It seems to be in every department you can pick up on housing. It shows what an important issue it is, and it really is important in Torquay. We've got so many homes that are not really fit for purpose, and this is going to work towards improving things for quite a few people. So I'm going to fully support this and really happy with the document.
Okay, I've got Councillor Barrand and Councillor Lewis who've indicated that they wish to speak. Councillor Barrand, please do come forward and share your thoughts.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening. I was very interested to hear what Councillor Carroll said, that decent homes is not too much to ask, and I fully agree with that. But then the leader of the council goes into a very overt political statement about how it's not our fault, Gov, it's all the others. Now, I raised this concern at a previous meeting, that the housing associations, I felt, are not being held high enough to account. When I raised this at the meeting, the previous meeting, the leader was quite dismissive that there was there was things in place to deal with making the housing associations do these repairs. Well, only a couple of days after, it was on the national news in Torquay, houses that were in such a dire state. Do you still agree that there are enough actions been taken by this council, bearing in mind you have actually been in control for 4 years now, 4 whole years? What have you done to hold these housing associations to account? You may well smile, councillor, but you know, these are real people with real problems. You can smile all you like, and are we not allowed to raise these concerns? Are we meant to leave you in this room of utopia where your council is doing everything it can and it's all that nasty government? Well, to be fair, 4 years in and things are still as bad as they were. You should be ashamed that you've not held these people more to account. Secondly, in a recent report, there was targets for affordable houses. The number mentioned was 180. In the report, it said, so far in the first 2 quarters, built 15. Are you not therefore ashamed that you've not reached anywhere near that target?
Councillor Barrand, I'm not putting up with words like this. Thank you. We'll leave it there. Thank you, Councillor Barrand. I'm not having "aren't you ashamed" as ways. And I think putting words in my mouth and suggesting that I was being dismissive is unacceptable, because that is not portraying what I was stating there. So I am very disappointed that you choose to behave in this manner, Councillor Barrand, and will not hear you any further on this particular item.
I'm disappointed with you also, Chairman.
Councillor Barrand, please, I'm chairing the meeting. Please do not be disrespectful to the chair. Thank you.
I didn't think anything I said was disrespectful.
Councillor Barrand, please stop interrupting or I'll ask you to be removed. So thank you, Councillor Barrand, you've been heard. Councillor Chris Lewis. Utopia.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I'm sorry to say, but it is a bit on the same subject. I mean, you did get political, you did blame the Conservative government for, as you do on a number of occasions. You have actually been in office for 4 years. And when you look at the report, how many have been built for this year? 15. The target 2 weeks ago or a week ago when the report was initially done was that the target for this year was 180. We brought it up at overview and scrutiny that that was an unrealistic target, as in the first 2 quarters we'd only built 15. I welcome the report has come back to reality and has reduced that to 50. But as you've only done 15 in the first 2 quarters, I think even 50 is unrealistic. The partnership have been in power for 4 years. At some stage, you've got to put your hand up, own up, and you've failed on affordable housing. If I may then go on to the consultation, which was mentioned, that the people in temporary accommodation, I'm pleased that they responded. We had 186 responses. Only 6% were from those in temporary accommodation. 79% of those who responded were over 45. 74% own their own homes. And I think it's a shame, and this isn't a political point, I think it is a shame, and hands up, we have found that it is difficult to hit those people who you really want to respond to those consultations. But I think we've got to try harder to reach those people, especially in a subject like housing, which is so important, that we actually reach those people. And that's why, you know, what my colleague said about the budget consultation. Consultation has been reduced over the past 4 years. We haven't got to the right people, and I think that's a shame. Somehow we've got to reach those people who really are affected, especially in the housing. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis. I've got Councillor Mike Morey who wants to come in next. Then I think I've got Councillor Jackie Stockman and then Nick Bye, Councillor Nick Bye. So, Councillor Mike Morey.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to sound a little bit like Methuselah now, but the fact of the matter remains that we had the proud history in this authority of providing social housing up until Thatcher and her government forced local authorities to sell off the council houses. We did actually have one whole side of Oldway Mansion geared as a department for housing, which provided housing in all aspects, and not only council housing but in private housing as well. So because of that, we are now in 4 years. You keep repeating. We're now trying to pick up the mess. I'm going to say it: the complete mess and the lack of. I'm trying to bite my tongue now, Chairman. Of commitment from the government to provide low-cost housing over the last years. So we're trying, and it takes more than 4 years to pick up the pieces that has been left for local authorities. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'll go for Councillor Stockman next.
Thank you, Chair. So I'd like to address 2 things, really. One, Councillor Barron, when he's speaking about social housing, so my challenge would be to you, all of you, how many of you have reported issues with social housing? What have you managed to do in your casework that's actually gone on to investigation, and how successful have you been in assisting the people that you serve? I could give you many, many stories from the beginning of myself being a councillor in 2007 as a lowly town councillor as to the success that I've had with one particular social provider. And indeed, Councillor Law and I worked together on a recent one which had a very successful outcome in Torquay. The this was passed on to Tara to actually provide a full report on how we had come to the position that we were in. So that would be my challenge to you from that point of view. And the other point of view is just to reiterate what I said earlier about there was no strategy for housing when I became a councillor. It took years to come to get a strategy, and we can't force developers to build. You know, whatever we do, we cannot force them. You heard David Edmondson say about should be produce 170 affordable homes. Wouldn't that be nice? But the fact of life is the developers don't produce them. They don't build. They gain planning permission and they sit on that. Now, part of the legislation that's coming forward from your government supposedly is to stop that. Whether that comes into being or not, given the fact that enormous sums of money support the Conservative Party from the developers, will be very interesting to see as we move forward and away from elections. I don't like being political, but or party political, but when it is thrown at you, unfortunately, all you can do is to refute what is being said. If you had a wonderful history of providing the homes that are required for the people that live here, then I would accept that. But in all honesty, you cannot sit there and say that you have done better. We've had 2 years pandemic. We've had inflation soaring unbelievably. We've had economic downturn. We've had funding given from government, which no way actually funds the projects that we're put forward to. And I suggest to you that I'd like to see you do better than we have done, given those circumstances. And I actually I think it's insulting to hear what was said earlier. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got Councillor By next, and I'm sure you're going to come forward and congratulate us on the affordable houses being built on Tweenaway Cross by Tor Vista.
What I'm going to try and do, Mr. Chairman, is calm things down. We've not got a good track record in recent years in Torquay of delivering sufficient affordable housing. And I think this debate this afternoon, I'm sorry to say, is an indication perhaps as to why that politics gets in the way. At overview and scrutiny, we looked, so I'm here as Nick Bye, Councillor for Wellswood, but I think also in the absence of the Chairman of the Overview and Scrutiny Board, I think it's fair to come back to you and say we appreciate that you have considered some of what was said at Overview and Scrutiny, but I would like a little bit of clarity in terms of why you have come up with this target of the number of affordable homes to be delivered of just 50. So when we discussed at Overview and Scrutiny that we should have, and the recommendation was that there should be a realistic and attainable housing target, and Mr. Mowat kindly said that there was a target, there was I think 160 or 180. I didn't think for 1 minute that that realistic and attainable target should be as low as 50. Councillor Lewis has said, you know, that's way more than what's actually been delivered. But I think what has been delivered in the last few years is so pitiful that we shouldn't take that as our target for the future. What we talked about at Overview and Scrutiny, please forgive me if my recollection is not correct, is that we should have the target that we had in the past, which was 100. We actually managed to deliver during my term and shortly afterwards, when my successor took office, 100 units of affordable housing each year in Torquay. The need, if anything, now is greater than it was then. You're on television, one of your colleagues was on television saying we now have 180 families in Torquay in bed and breakfast. A few months ago it was 150. We used to get really upset years ago if it got to more than 20 or 30 in bed and breakfast. This report says there are 1,600 households now on the housing waiting list in Torquay. So it seems to me that the target that you've come up with, we need to have some better understanding as to why it is a target so low at 50. I'm going to call it up, if you excuse me just 1 second, the paper, pushing a few numbers and a few buttons, because it seems in great contradiction with, you've got your 2 performance indicators targets. Number 1 here is the net additional homes provided annually, and that's referred to twice in the report. So we have a target of producing net new homes of 720, and I applaud that target of 720. That in the report is what you say the government says, and that's what our housing need is, 720. And yet number 2, the number of affordable homes to be delivered is now just 50. So we're going to deliver less than 10% of our total housing as affordable homes. So I think we do need to have some clarification of that. And I'd like you please to consider again the Overview and Scrutiny Board's target, which we managed to achieve in the past. We actually smashed in the past. We exceeded over 100 each year.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Byrne. I'm just extremely concerned that you're misrepresenting... Oh, sorry. I'm just concerned that you're misrepresenting the facts on the ground in Torquay from your statement there. You said we had 180 people in, or households in bed and breakfast accommodation. That is not the case. That is an untruth that's been told this evening. It's people in temporary accommodation that we have, not bed and breakfast. So I think that needs setting straight away. I'm sure that on the key point that you were making, and I hope it was a slip of the tongue about bed and breakfast, rather than misconstruing, I'm sure Councillor Long will address in his summing up at the end before we go to the vote on those very tangible points that you were making there. Councillor David Thomas, and then I've got Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of issues raised that I will try to speak about, and I think that I do have some experience being a representative of King's Ash for some 12 years and a councillor in Preston for some 4 years. And Councillor Jackie Stockman was talking about those issues of social providers. I mean, I could, no names, no pack drill, but the amount of work that I had in King's Ash based on housing from registered social landlord providers was in comparison to the work that I get in Preston based on issues from landlords, private landlords, is really chalk and cheese. But I think if we get down to some of the comments that were made, Councillor Stockman said it was insulting. I think it's not insulting. What we are actually dealing with the facts, and the facts that are written on the paper that we've got in front of us tonight. Yes, maybe you find those insulting, but the facts are that 23 affordable homes were delivered in 21-22 as per Appendix 5, unless of course that's wrong, but I believe it is correct. And the number of affordable homes currently due to be delivered now was 180, as Councillor Bai said. That has now been reduced down to 50 in Appendix 5 this evening. And out of that, 7 been delivered in Q1, 8 delivered in Q2. I think that if this report is approved tonight, and I've got a question directly for Councillor Morey, who's the Council's portfolio holder in this area, how does this actually square the circle with our local plan? Our local plan talks about 180, and let's just confirm for ourselves how that 180 is arrived at, it's basically 600 homes times by 30%. I'll do the maths for you, Mike, nice and easy. It comes out at 180. So if we're now reducing the affordable homes down to 50, are we reducing the percentage of affordable homes out of 600, or are we actually reducing the number of homes to be delivered across the bay? If we still want 30%, are we, and again the maths will come out at 150. So I just think there is a conflict there, and I would just like to have real understanding this evening, and to understand that the Cabinet, more importantly, the Cabinet understand that a decision on this report, how it is written, how that will have further impact on the policies as we move forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. I'm sure Councillor Long will address those issues in his summing up at the end. Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I'd just like to pick up on Councillor Stockman's comments regarding sort of implying that us as councillors and our casework, that we don't deal with people who, regarding social housing.
Sorry, can we just please, Councillor Foster, as long as you're not putting words in people's mouths, let's try and be like Councillor Bye was and Councillor Dave Thomas was, addressing the issues in front of us.
Okay,
Thank
well,
you.
I apologise, I misled her, but she mentioned something about councillors and their casework, and as you are well aware, Councillor Darling, Councillor Long, half the senior officers here are aware for the last 12 months I've been dealing with a case around social housing. So, you know, we all do get these cases and we all do what we can, so just to put the record straight on that. And it's been documented about the history and whose fault it was and whose fault it wasn't. But I think what is very clear is that not enough houses have been built. But I want to leave that aside, because what I want to just mention is about the crisis, the housing crisis review that was done. Now, that was concluded just over 12 months ago. And in that review, we didn't look at the building of new houses, but we looked at empty properties, we looked at downsizing, we looked at what was being built on brownfield sites, we looked at how difficult it had been for care leavers to find suitable homes, and we also looked at the enforcement of poor properties, because it was evidence that people were living in properties with damp, whole range of issues, who were then moving out and were then being added onto the housing list. So there was a big picture there, and I think it's not included in the report, but that has been not very much done at all, where there was an opportunity there for houses to be found. It's been very lacklustre. I believe in December was when there was an extra person was employed about empty properties. The planning department, nothing's been added to that, as what I could say about the enforcement of poor quality homes. So it's not just about the building of the new properties, and the argument can go on forever as to whose fault it has been, but the result is not enough houses has been built and not enough has been done looking at all the other options that can be done around the downsizing, the empty properties, the whole raft of the other things. So I think the report is quite lacking in what it has done, and to put a bit more meat on the bone of what it could be doing in the future. So thank you very much, then, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Foster. So, Councillor Cowell, do come in.
Thank you, Chair. And as I said when I seconded this, I mean, housing is an issue, it's a passion of mine. And now I'm born and bred in Torquay, and I find it shameful that we've only got 8% of our housing stock in the social rented sector. That's probably about a third of the national average. And then you can reflect, why is that? Well, it's because for many years, decades, there have been periods of political control in Torquay where housing has been, I was almost going to say, not even on the agenda, and I think that's probably not stretching the point too far in some instances, where the political leadership oversaw the breakup of the housing, as Councillor Darling mentioned earlier, to all four corners of the council, with not having a single strategic housing department. We lost our housing revenue account many, many years ago. And I'm reflecting as I sit in this conference centre that was built using £2.5 million stolen from the housing revenue account by the then Conservative administration that could have been building new replacement council houses. It was a Conservative administration that sold off Torbay's housing stock to a social provider that is now in the guise of Sanctuary. One of those social providers that actually we have challenges with and are the landlord of some of those challenged homes. And I recognise that their funding is equally as challenged. But it's a pity that, you know, we're in this position in Torbay that we have got such poor levels of social housing and affordable homes. And I think it's quite ironic, isn't it, that one of the reasons we've got an unwanted housing development at Inglewood is because of our lack of housing delivery in recent years. And yet a few yards down the road from that Inglewood development, there's the Devonshire Park. That's actually got a housing allocation that was agreed by a previous administration's Development Management Control Committee for less than 10% affordable housing. I've got a feeling it may have been as low as 8%. And it's those kind of decisions that have led to that reduction of that 30% target that we would allude to. And in actual fact, guess what? Devonshire Park hasn't even started. And that is another example of land banking that has to be addressed by government in terms of if you get your planning permissions, if you don't start building those homes, you land bank, then you start paying double council tax on each of those approved properties. Hit the developers in the pocket, gives them less to donate to their paymasters in Whitehall and more to deliver at local level. We've also seen, and again, Holcombe, that was a private development. That fell by the wayside. That's over 100 homes. And if people want to talk about what we're doing as an administration and what we're looking to invest in, just think about the properties that we're currently building at what was a derelict site on the corner of Tweenaway for decades. That is now being built out. It would be occupied by now had the construction company got wrapped up in the collapse of Midas. We're progressing plans for St Kilda's in Brixton. We're buying £10 million worth of houses through the PHI process for temporary accommodation to provide over 30 homes. We're moving ahead with plans at Tor Marine and at Crossways. You know, there are 200 to 300 properties involved in those schemes. That's an unprecedented level. And to Councillor Bye's credit, I think the last similar schemes that were delivered at that level were under his administration all those years ago. More years ago than I think any of us would probably want to remember. But it's that long ago that we last saw any meaningful delivery of social housing and housing for independent living, which I think is to the shame. And I think it's to the detriment of the previous administration, two administrations that we inherited from, that the then mayor really had no commitment to housing in Torbay. There were opportunities when I was a councillor in Tormone on 2 or 3 sites, including Lymington Road and the former B&Q site, and he actually blocked those. And I remember having conversations at the time with the leader of the opposition about some of those issues, that, you know, he was a great believer that the market will deliver. Well, we've seen what the market delivery is. It's slow and it's inappropriate. So, you know, I genuinely hope that we can move forward in a positive way and start thinking about getting that housing delivery over the line and stop politicising what in actual fact is a real crisis for many of our families and residents in Torbay. Thank you, Chair.
Right, so Councillor Long, I'll come to you now for summing up. I wonder how much of your thunder may have been stolen by Councillor Long, by Councillor Cowell.
And by yourself as well, I'll have to say. I remember in 2017 there was a by-election when I was brought onto the council, and one of the issues in that by-election was the fact that the council then had spent more on luxury beach huts than on affordable housing. And a lot has happened since then. And as colleagues have alluded to, the housing department has had to be essentially put back together again. And when I became the housing portfolio holder, I was shocked to discover that housing was spread not in one central department, but in 3 or 4 others, ranging from housing to Councillor Morey's department to adult social care to Councillor Carter's portfolio. So there wasn't actually a housing department per se, and we're having to put that back together. And I know that colleagues from the opposite corner have been surprised in meetings to discover that the impact that austerity has had on housing posts, for example, the enabling officer post, which is essentially gone and was part of a post in the TDA, and the empty homes officer had gone, and we're having to put all those back together again and lay the foundations for a housing department. And one of the issues at the end of the last administration was the fact that we needed a housing company, and that never came forward. And we've had to do that, and that housing company and that housing department is now building the properties at Twinway Cross, which were left empty for so long. There was a discussion, slightly heated, Mr. Chairman, about housing associations. We actually do have good relations with housing associations now, and I just anecdotally, I had some casework on Christmas Eve from residents of a housing association in the Pendennis area, and I'm pleased to say that the housing association was swift to respond to those concerns. So they can move if needed, and if the right lobbying is raised with them. And it's such a shame that much of our old stock that we used to have directly controlled is now part of housing associations. And I think in terms of the consultation, we made sure that people on the housing waiting list and in temporary accommodation were actually included, and I don't think they would have automatically been if we hadn't requested that. In terms of the targets, there's been a discussion on the targets. Tonight is a discussion about the overall strategy and getting that underway. That's the important decision before us. I'm going to ask Mr. Merck to come in, but my understanding is that the 50 is a minimum figure, and in any case, the targets are a living, breathing element of this report and form part of the action plan, and the Cabinet will have a say over that in any case. But in case I haven't explained that properly, Mr. Merck, did you want to say a few words?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Long. And just to try and help provide some clarity, the Overview and Scrutiny Board asked or recommended to the Cabinet that they should look at realistic and attainable target for delivery of the number of affordable homes to be delivered each year. The figures that were presented to the Overview and Scrutiny Board by way of background said 180. The figures that are attached to the report this evening, again by way of background, have been adjusted to 50 in the spirit of the recommendation that came through from Overview and Scrutiny Board. But you're absolutely right, Councillor Long. That's not the decision that's being made tonight. That's about the delivery plan, which is a Cabinet will be approving that, but subject to, as you said, the fact that it's an evolving document. And what needs to be done, I think, is we need to link the targets to the action plan, and I'm pretty sure that that's something that officers will be advising the Cabinet on to ensure that happens. Because at the moment it's that the Appendix 5 references the targets that were agreed by Cabinet last July. So that needs to be amended, and I think it's been a good debate through Overview and Scrutiny and then on through to Cabinet. And you know, yes, it's not close to the actual figures delivered in Q1 and Q2, but it's a stretch target nonetheless. And it's one of those issues where clearly Overview and Scrutiny thought 180 was too high. 50 probably won't be achieved, but we need to have that stretch. If we don't have that stretch, we won't deliver 50. So I think it's an appropriate figure, and officers took quite a bit of time considering what would be an appropriate figure, and that will be the recommended when those targets are adjusted. Thank you.
Councillor Long, do you have any further reflections, or are you happy if we go to the vote?
I'm happy to go to the vote now. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, all those in favour, please show.
It's unanimous, Chair.
Right, thank you. Colleagues, we now move on to the report in respect of domestic abuse and sexual violence strategy. Councillor Carter.
Thank you. Hang on a minute. Our domestic abuse and sexual violence strategy is due to end in March, and this new strategy addresses domestic abuse and sexual violence, but with more of a focus on the sexual violence. This strategy will help us in delivering safe places, supporting victims, address the behaviour that causes harm, and so our vulnerable adults and their children can survive. We held a consultation for 6 weeks from October to November last year on a draft strategy, which included various other documents and projects such as the Call to Action Sexual Violence Project, in which Torquay Council and other services have been involved, and took into account the demand for our sexual violence services. We want this strategy to be more responsive, especially to Torquay's diversity. This strategy recognises that both women and men can be victims of abuse and can be residents from ethnic minority backgrounds or from the LGBTQ+ community. Through the consultation, we have updated and made improvements to the strategy. When you read through it, you can see what people have told us and how we are responding. It's quite a hard read emotionally, but it is essential we respond by improving the work we do along with our partners too. The document has been to overview and scrutiny, and the recommendation was to support the strategy subject to the inclusion of a glossary of terms which has now been included. I therefore propose that the Cabinet make the recommendation to the Council that the domestic abuse and sexual violence strategy as set out in Appendix 1 to the submitted report be approved.
Thank you. So, Councillor Stockman, I understand you may wish to second.
Thank you, Chair. I'm pleased to second this proposal. I will try not to repeat what Councillor Carter has said. This new strategy has been devised following analysis of all the review findings. It was found that there is commonality between domestic abuse and sexual violence, and so this is the main focus of the strategy. On page 175, you will see listed what the strategies are in relationship to lived experience and how each area will be addressed. I'm sure when you read some of the harrowing stories contained within the strategy, you will agree that this is the right approach to be taken. Just to quote a few statistics that struck me, they were that 1/3 of sexual violent victims who are female are under the age of 15, and more than half of, that's 55% of all male victims were also age 15 or under. That's a sobering thought for all of us. People who experience trauma in early life often experience or go on to experience chaotic lifestyles in later life through no fault of their own, and taking a whole family approach, as the feedback survey showed, is the right way to go, so the strategy was updated to include this. Page 176.57 gives more detail. The draft strategy was presented to ONS, as Councillor Carter says, the ONS board, who unanimously voted to approve that Cabinet be recommended to support it. I would like to thank the officers responsible for this very well-produced strategy called Breaking the Chain, Domestic Abuse and Sexual Violence Strategy 2023-2030, which is one I'm sure we can all support. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Long, I understand you wish to come in now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and there was a good discussion about this at overview and scrutiny as well. But one item I wanted to highlight was from the equality impacts in item 9. And the strategy says in that section that it aims to address the fact that the LGBTQ plus community is less visible to these services, and it needs to address that. And this is particularly worrying because the report goes on to say that LGBTQ plus victims of domestic abuse are more likely to have been abused by multiple partners, and it's 15% compared to 9% for others. And I think you could highlight the lack of visibility of this community to many services across not only this council, but councils across the country and other services as well. And I was going to say this earlier, but only group leaders are allowed to speak, but this is one good reason to have an inclusion officer on the council, because one crucial thing I imagine that they will be doing is making sure that the council has lots of stats, all the crucial data, and to be able to make sure that not only this service but other services are serving all the communities that make up Torquay. And I know from people who got in touch with me that certainly a number of members of the LGBTQ plus community don't feel that the council serves them well, and many feel that the council is homophobic, and I know there is work going on to improve that, and that's where an inclusion officer would come in. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Lisa, any other hands from around the table or elsewhere in the room?
No one from round your table, but Councillor Foster from the wider room.
Councillor Foster, do come in or take a seat and speak.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you're aware, there's been many other reports that have come through the council and through cabinet regarding domestic violence, and I've supported all the way what the council does do. So I am the domestic violence champion to represent the council, and I do attend many of the meetings that are held and the events throughout the year. So there's the standing tall, there's the forum, and what really comes out when you go to these meetings is there's lots of partners who I know the council works with, whether it's the police, a whole range of children's services, a whole range of different departments, and they're all working very, very hard, and they've all got a story to tell about how to reach people who are suffering. That is one of the most difficult things, but it's to get there can be about making everybody aware that there is support out there for them. And also when you see the statistics of how many people can be during their life a victim of domestic violence, we're in a room here with about 30 people. There will be people in this room who have been victims of domestic violence. Statistics will say that. Unfortunately, that also leaves that there is the possibility that there could be perpetrators. So it happens throughout life to many, many different people throughout their lives. But as a council, working with all the other organisations, I think this just shows in this report how important it is that we all work together to try and identify and make sure that help and support is there for those people. And as I just indicated, all the meetings that I've been to and the events and meeting all the different groups, a lot of people out there are doing a lot of work, and it's really good that the report now identifies who is the council's representative on it, and I look forward to seeing Christine at some of these events in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Foster. So it's been proposed and seconded already. We've had a reasonable debate. All those in favour, please show.
Unanimous, Chair.
Thank you. And so we now move on to changing places for Brixham. Councillor Stockman.
Thank you, Chair. I'm delighted to propose 3.1, and I'm going to read it out if you don't mind, because it makes more sense if you read out what the proposals are. 3.1, that subject to the change request and associated funding from the Department of Housing and Levelling Up being agreed, that the project for the delivery of the one Changing Places unit in Brixham Town Centre car park be approved, and 3.2, that the ongoing revenue, maintenance and cleaning costs be added to the current council contract with Healthmatic. It has always been the desire of myself and more widely the administration to reduce inequalities and bring Torquay up to the standard of a premier resort. This is part of this aim. There are over 250,000 severely disabled people in the country requiring hygienic, safe and spacious toilet facilities. In the future, any future public building or any change of use to public buildings will be required to include a changing places within those builds. Changing places, for those of you that aren't aware, are toilets with additional space for carers and equipment such as hoists. They have adult-sized changing benches, curtains or screens for privacy. They enable the profoundly disabled to access the town centres and their community, or when people visit, without being hindered by the lack of appropriate toilet facilities. Currently, there is only one Changing Places toilet in Torquay, situated by the View Cinema in Paignton. And I understand from Steve Marks, who was from MENCAP and was part of the group that to study this, that's a gold star facility. The original idea, when we were successful in obtaining a grant of 180,000, was for two proposed sites, one in Torquay and the other in Brixham. Unfortunately, after a lot of searching, the current sites in Torquay proved to be unviable, as the funding does not include the purchase of sites. We therefore decided to go ahead with one Changing Places in Brixham and hope to apply for further funding should it become available in the near future. A breakdown of the funding can be found on page 213 and ongoing costs on 214. The expected total cost for the one Changing Places is 130,000, and we have been provided assurance from DLUC, so that's Department for Levelling Up Housing and Community, that as long as we can evidence costs and that our 151 officer, before he runs away, will sign off on them, and it sits within the grant conditions, that changes or increases to the funding to enable the delivery of the scheme are likely to be approved. The description of the site in Brixham is described in the report, but basically it is where the derelict ticket building is in the car park, and it should greatly improve the look of the area. There are one or two little things that need to be sorted out, and that's new ticket machines for the car park, and the CCTV hub that's in there needs to be moved. But other than that, it will be a great asset to Brixham and the wider bay, because it will allow people to go out with their families and enjoy the whole day out. And I do look forward to one being built in Torquay as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And I'd like to second from the Chair this report. It is very welcome news having such a second facility in Torquay. As somebody with a disability myself, I think it's really important that those members of our communities and visitors who do suffer from multiple mobility challenges, who do tend to use the changing facilities, changing places facilities such as this, have that opportunity that many of us take for granted of being able to enjoy Torquay. And I'm just delighted that we're not only hearing today that we've got one over the line in Brixham, but the third one that will help complete the spread that we would all want to see across the bay is in the offing as well. So I hope colleagues will be supportive of the recommendations before us this evening. Lisa, do we have any hands raised? Councillor Cowell?
Thank you, Chair. Just very quickly, I mean, fully support this initiative, and I look forward to seeing the third one delivered in Torquay in due course. And I think it's another sign of our commitment to invest in Brixham as well. My understanding is that these changing place facilities are nationally advertised. So that is actually a very good additional benefit in terms of our promoting Torquay as the premier resort. And clearly those people with an interest in using those kind of facilities, if you're going away on holiday, that's the kind of thing you're going to look for. And if you can see that there's 2 and hopefully soon to be 3 in Torquay, then that is a real positive sign of that investment. So thank you, Chair.
Councillor Morey, and then I've got Councillor Foster, if you want to come forward ready for when Councillor Morey's finished. Councillor Foster.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Without trying to duplicate what Jackie said, Councillor Stockman said, or Jackie said, we were given that grant of 180 grand back in March of 22. It was the 180 grand we had hoped would provide for the toilets at Brixham and Torquay. Unfortunately, it became aware that we couldn't afford both sites. The infrastructure, we were looking, I think, at Fleet Street and Polk Street as a possibility, but the capital investment went up sky high. So unfortunately, fortunately for Brixham, but unfortunately for Torquay, it was decided we could not afford, of that 180 grand, we could not afford both sites. So with your approval, if you put it this way, with your approval, members, we could actually start the work early autumn, winter period, obviously after the holiday season, because it's in the main car park. We're actually, I don't know if Jackie mentioned it, actually utilising the old, what was the old ticket office for that. We did try another site next to the existing toilets, but there was not room enough to put it there. So the ticket block was the chosen character. But so with your approval, let's hopefully get the thing going for autumn. And obviously, when opportunity arises, we'll look for grants for the Torquay end of the bay. Thank you.
Councillor Foster, would you like to come in?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to say I fully support this report, and to welcome that it was the Conservative government that gave the £180,000 grant. When the grant was announced last March, I did contact the council and officers to see if Babbicombe Downs, something around the Babbicombe area, tourist area, could be considered. I can fully understand Brixham, and I can fully understand that Torquay Centre was looked at, but now that Torquay Centre doesn't seem to be anything viable, just to add that if something could be done around the Babbicombe area, that would be willing to do what I can to work with officers to make sure it happens. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Foster, and may I remind you that we've faced £700 million of cuts from the Conservative government and a £96 million gap in this year's funding compared to what we would have normally received had those cuts not been made. So thank you for advising us of that grant to go some way of making up for those cuts. Councillor Stockman, do come in.
Just really quickly, I think it should be acknowledged that all of the hard work that the individual officers have been put into this, not only do they have to apply for the grant, but they then have to carry this forward to fruition. And so every officer that has been involved in this should be thanked. And it is something that I know is very close to Joe Williams, our ADAS, and to me. And and it is very advantageous to the disabled people in the Bay. And we also have a Cheshire Homes in Brixham, and I'm sure that they will love to be able to come down into the town and enjoy their time without having to worry about having to get back. And it's really important to say that. So I thank everybody that's been involved in it. Thank you.
Councillor Bai, do feel free to come in, and then I will be looking at going to the vote shortly thereafter.
Well, thank you again, Mr. Chairman, and I want to try and keep everything very jolly. As there are moments tonight when I feel we're all getting on very well, and then there are moments when it perhaps seems to go in the other direction, and maybe this is one of the latter. I want to get some better understanding as to why we're not going forward with a Changing Places facility in Torquay. It seems to me, having read the report and listening to colleagues, that we applied and were granted £180,000 from the government for 2 facilities within the Bay, one in Torquay, one in Brixham. The cost of the Brixham project has escalated, and okay, it seems that the Department for Levelling Up Communities and Housing is prepared to accept that, but we're not spending the 180. Reading through the report, it sounds to me as though we're actually going to be sending £50,000 back, and I am absolutely concerned for our reputational damage for Torquay to be sending money back when the government has made £180,000 available. We're not spending 180, we're spending 130 because we failed to find a site in Torquay. I find that almost beyond belief. If you were to look out for a site in Brixham or Torquay, I would actually have thought it would be more difficult to find a site in Brixham, which is much more constrained and where the council owns less property other than just the car park. In Torquay, we now own a wealth of properties around the town, shopping centres and so on. In fact, the guidance for Changing Places facilities is that when you have a new shopping centre, or you refurbish a shopping centre, or you establish a museum, a theatre or a cinema, you should include a Changing Places facility within that. Torquay Council owns a tremendous amount of land around the harbour side, around the seafront, the freehold, in fact, of our theatre, the new shopping centre that we've recently acquired, Fleet Walk, and Debenhams. I find it almost unbelievable that we can't identify a site within Torquay, which is the largest of the 3 towns. Your ambition for the Bay, but Torquay perhaps paramount to be the premier resort. It's a surprise to me that we can't be going ahead with a Changing Places facility in Torquay as well as Brixham, and I don't want to see the money sent back to government. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Bai, and thank you for sharing those thoughts. Torquay being the largest town in Torquay, and I'm sure Joe Williams will be able to give you some comfort in this situation as far as our aspirations for Torquay. Joe, are you able to assist?
Yes, so the department haven't actually asked for the money back. There isn't an intention to give the money back, rather look at a second round and to negotiate with the Department of Levelling Up for a second Changing Places site. So that's what we're focused on at the moment. And as Councillor Morey said, the options appraisal that we did at the time with the sites we'd identified, the sites in Torquay Town Centre were too expensive. So that's why the options appraisal process led us to Brixham. However, the group is committed to a second site, and we are certainly talking to the department about that. And they are the negotiations would at any second round, which is imminent, we understand, would include exploration of other sites. And thank you, Councillor Foster's suggestion of Babacombe Downs. That's certainly something we can look at.
So, Councillor Cordelia Law, and then we'll look to go to the vote.
Thank you. I'm just going to bring this back to the the changing places in Brixham, which is I think it's fantastic. I used to look after a young lady in a wheelchair. Apart from, I think anyone who's had children who's been trying to change their kids on their knee in a public toilet will know how absolutely impossible that is. If you look after someone who is in a wheelchair when they get into their teens or even as an adult, that sort of action is just not possible. And it restricts people, it restricts disabled people being able to get out, enjoy the fresh air and enjoy the wonderful place that we live. Not just about holidaymakers, it restricts our residents too. I don't think there's any discussion about giving the money back. It's a shame that nationally prices of doing these things have shot up so much that we can't actually get to changing places out of this. Because if I had my way, we'd have one in St Mary Church at Babbacombe, town centre, any centre where we're encouraging our people to go and be outdoors. We need this. I find it absolutely appalling that disabled people have such difficulty accessing facilities, and it's not just here, it's all around the country. So I wholeheartedly support this. I wholeheartedly support all the work that's been done to look at 2 places, and I grovel to Joe that we keep going, please, to find another one, at least another one in Torquay. And as Joe knows, this is a real passion of mine. She's always getting things about access to our beaches as well for our disabled people, and I think the changing places is just the start. Part of providing these changing places is that so we can look at the access to our beaches, because we don't want to be encouraging people and give them access to the beach if there's no facilities for them to use in the areas. So keep up the good work, keep trying, and hopefully we'll have more than 3 before too long. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Law. So it's been proposed and seconded. All those in favour, please show.
Unanimous, Chair.
Thank you. So, colleagues, we now move on to the Torquay Independent Reviewing Service report for 21-22. Councillor Law, I understand you're presenting this one.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so this is about our Independent Reviewing Officers report, so or IROs for short. So our IROs play a vitally important role in ensuring that we're carrying out our duties as corporate parents to a very high standard. All our IROs are experienced, skilled and knowledgeable children's social workers, and they have to have a minimum of 5 years service, and some of ours have over 20 years practical experience as social workers. IROs ensure that our care plans for our cared for children and young people address their needs appropriately, and that their voice and their opinions are not just heard but are used to inform and to improve their plans accordingly. One of the pivotal roles of the IROs is to raise any issues affecting a child's care with our social work service. So where, for example, there may be performance issues, care planning and resources are affecting the child or young person's plans progressing and their needs and preventing their needs from being met. This is then flagged by the independent reviewing officer, who considers what intervention and support is required to help our children and young people achieve their goals. This report is for the year 21-22, so it covers the period during the pandemic, and the IRO service suffered from the impact of sickness during this time, as well as staff vacancies. But despite those challenges, the service began to stabilise in the last quarter, and in total 709 reviews were undertaken, and that's 168 more than the previous year, where 541 were undertaken. The report contains a wealth of information and data, and you'll probably be relieved to know I'm not going to go through it all, but I hope you've all looked at it. I'm going to refrain. And I think it talks about how well we as corporate parents are meeting our children's needs. It evaluates the effectiveness and impact of the service, and it highlights in the report our reduction in the number of our cared for children, and it identifies that performance for Torquay's children has improved significantly during this period. With an increase in connected carers and foster care arrangements being converted into special guardianship arrangements, there's also an increase in the long-term stability and long-term matched placements of our children, and a greater proportion of our cared for children are benefiting from staying put arrangements as they move through to adulthood. I urge you to look at the information and data in the report. There's so much there. It's really hard for me not to go through it all in great detail, but I'm going to move on and say that the recommendation before you is that the Torquay Independent Reviewing Service Annual Report 21-22 be approved and published in accordance with the legislative requirements. This has previously been to ONS, and I don't know if Nick would like to say anything as he's here this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mike Moore, I understand you're planning to second.
Yeah, I'm going to be very brief, Chair, but what jumped out at me when I did read the report was, I think it's 1-2 of the report, where it was highlighted that despite COVID-19, despite long-term sickness of staff and short-term sickness of staff, there's now brought about a stability and consistency in that service. And that, to me, just highlights, and I have no doubt at all that that has played its part in Torquay Council being nominated 1 in 5 of the most improved councils in the country. So I'm more than happy to second this, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Morey. Do we have any hands at the moment, Lisa?
Nobody's indicated, Chair, unless
Right.
Councillor Bye would like to.
No, that's fine.
Councillor Bye's coming first.
That's fine. Well, I'm going to comment myself first anyway, as he was slow on the draw. And I would say, Councillor Bye, do feel free to come and join us in due course. But I just wanted to comment that I engaged with a gentleman who was supporting our IROs, a gentleman who was a former director of Children's Services for North Lincolnshire and also had been involved in Leeds Social Services as a trainer for our IROs. And I would say he left me with a very moving effect. Me being adopted myself, he was reflecting to me how he used to be a docker in Hull. He trained up and became a social worker. And one of the first people he came across was somebody who had been adopted, like myself, at birth. And he was therefore going through the paperwork about why they'd become adopted and preparing them for them meeting their birth parents as an adult. And the reflection from that individual when they were looking through the paperwork, I don't understand why I was adopted, why did this happen? And I think the key phrase that I went away with was where the individual was saying to him as a social worker, it didn't have to be like this. And he said that that had coloured the rest of his life as a social worker of actually thinking in that restorative practice approach that we have recently become accredited for as a local authority that we should be celebrating, that is what social work should be about, is how you can make good a family rather than being a child rescuing service. And I think that is the journey we have been on. And I know that he triggered significant reflection and positiveness from IROs, and I suspect he was in supporting them in this year that this refers to. And so he was an inspirational character, and I know he was to our IROs when he came in and supported them. So I really welcome this report. But Councillor Bye.
Thank you indeed, and it's an area where we all work together, and I think that shows that we all work together for children in Torquay. The report is largely historic. It's for 2021 to 2022. It's almost a year out of date. So we looked at this, I believe, to get prompted, because I'm getting a bit old now and the memory's gone, but I think we looked at this at overview and scrutiny some considerable time ago. In the report, it talks about getting things together by the end of January 2023 to see that the team is fully in place and that you have permanent staff and that things are progressing with a target there for January 2023. We're now February 2023. So absolutely, Children's Services Overview and Scrutiny Board will do as we're supposed to do and challenge and look forward to the next report coming in a timely fashion to make sure that everything is in place for the good of our children in Torquay. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councillor Bai. So, colleagues, Councillor Law, if you want to come in and respond, and then we'll go to the vote.
Yeah, thank you. Just to give Councillor Bai some reassurance that the service has, as it says in the report, stabilised a lot. We just have one vacancy at the moment, and I think that's going to be interviewed pretty soon. We have a permanent head of staff, head of service. Sorry, it's getting late. Head of service, and who's been actually with Torquay for quite a long time, and I think the service is really starting to pick up and really benefiting from the input of having permanent staff. It's another area of our social care where we're no longer really reliant, as we previously were, on agency staff. So I think it's a good news story. It's taken a long time to come here, but it has been to Children's ONS before then. So I hope that when you see the report next year, there's even better news in it. But the whole point of the IRO service is actually to challenge and to look at where we could be doing things better. So I would worry if it didn't contain things like that in the report, because I think that is the whole point of the service, is to challenge us, to drive us forward, and to make sure that we are doing the best we can for the children who are in our care, for whom we are all corporate parents. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So it's been moved and seconded. All those in favour, please show.
Unanimous, Chair.
Thank you. So, colleagues, Councillor Carter, I understand that you're presenting the report on pay policy and pensions. I'm sure we've all been waiting for this one.
Oh, okay. Right. This is the annual pay policy statement, and the main thing that changes in the annual pay policy is the pay multiplier figures, which show the difference in ratio between the highest, lowest and medium earners in the council. You can find this within the annual pay policy statement, and that's in Appendix 1 of this report. And due to the pay award in 2022, the difference is much smaller in ratio than it was the year before. The pensions discretions have been reviewed, and the local government pension scheme contribution rates and bandings have been updated. And like the annual pay policy statement, it needs approving annually too. If approved, then both the pay policy statement and the pension discretion will be published on the council website. There are several risks if these are not approved tonight. For instance, under employment law, the council could be subject to heavy penalties through equal pay and discrimination claims. There is also a risk of enforcement from the Equal and Human Rights Commission, and a risk of damage to the council's reputation for non-compliance with the equal pay legislation if pay and grading processes are not followed. The trade unions representing our staff will be consulted on these documents at joint consultative meetings. So I therefore move our recommendation to that we wish to put to the council, that Torquay Council's annual pay policy statement 2023-24, as set out in Appendix 1 to the submitted report, be approved for publication, and to the employer's pension discretion set out in Appendix 2 to the submitted report, be approved for publication.
Thank you, Councillor Carter. Councillor Cowell, I understand you may wish to second.
Yes, and I don't think I can add anything to Councillor Carter's comprehensive introduction, and if there is significant debate, I'll save it for full council. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, colleagues, any hands up for interest in debating this? Are we happy to?
Nobody's indicated, Chair.
Okay, all those in favour, please show.
Unanimous, Chair.
Thank you. That concludes our meeting. Thank you.